next, I am recommending an update on the school calendar proposed for the 24-25 school year. So just for clarity, that's not the upcoming school year, but that calendar is already in place. And as you know, Mrs. Coy has brought forward the work the calendar committee has undergone to develop a draft and seek community feedback prior to today, and are bringing that process to a close here with a final recommendation at this meeting, an opportunity to ask questions, and then would be seeking your approval at our monthly meeting this evening. Mrs. Coy.
Thank you, Dr. Cashwell, and good afternoon, Chair Kinsella and Vice Chair Atkins, members of the board. I'm pleased to bring you a follow-up report on the 24-25 proposed calendar for your consideration. I'll start by saying this continues to be a very collaborative process, and we really appreciate the time and expertise of everyone who's contributed to the calendar that is before you today. Since the preliminary draft was presented to you at the March meeting, we've continued the conversations with staff, conducted a community-wide survey, conferred with our partners and divisions around us, and convened the calendar committee one more time. The culmination of those conversations is a revised draft of the calendar, which, as Dr. Cashwell mentioned, we're bringing for your approval this evening. Following the March 9th board meeting, a community survey was launched in both English and Spanish to receive input from staff and families. The draft calendar that you all reviewed at the March 9th meeting was included so that families and staff could react to a concrete proposal. The feedback was collected over 2 weeks roughly, and the next few slides are going to reflect some of those results. You'll see from this first one what the participation looked like. Parents and staff were the primary audience, though we did get a few student responses and other community members. The first topic that we asked about was the wellness days. The survey feedback overwhelmingly affirmed the placement of those days in the proposed draft, which creates 2 4-day weekends by placing the wellness days adjacent to Election Day and President's Day. And you'll see here that that support was pretty overwhelming across everybody surveyed. The next set of questions was around the possibility of a staggered start for those grade bands new to a particular building, pre-K and kindergarten, 6th grade, and 9th grade. Staggered starts allow for those grade bands of students to start 1 or 2 days ahead of the rest of the school. The purpose of this is to help familiarize students with their new building, the new logistical routines, and to create special opportunities for the relationships between those students and their teachers to begin at the beginning of the year. One of the advantages of this model, which is used by some divisions around us, but not all, is that it provides an equitable start to the year for all students, rather than some being able to participate in orientation days over the summer and others not able to do so for any number of reasons: parent work schedules, vacation schedules, lack of transportation. This was the first time we had asked our community about this topic. And so we used some specific questions around the different grade bands, but then we also got a lot of feedback in the open comment section at the end to understand what support looks like, what concerns there were about the idea. So the next few slides show the results for pre-K, K, 6th, and 9th separately. And as you'll see, the reactions were varied. There was some solid support, but that was mixed with some concern and some indifference all around. So this first slide has the response. They were asked whether or not they would support a staggered start for pre-kindergarten students. And interestingly, as you'll see, this had the lowest support overall as compared to some of the other grade bands. On this next slide, you'll see that about 45% of respondents supported a staggered start for kindergartners, and our staff were the most supportive in this compared to other groups on this kindergarten one. When we get to 6th graders, we see that parents were actually slightly more supportive than staff with the model, with overall support hovering right around 41%. Responses for 9th grade were pretty similar to what we saw with the 6th graders, with overall support right around 41% and parent support slightly higher than staff support. So the numbers show one thing about varied results, but the comments submitted also illuminated concerns that really ran the gamut. So we heard about concerns about childcare and inequities in family with some children in school and others that had not yet started. We got a lot of questions about the value of doing this just for 1 or 2 days. Was that enough time for those relationships and logistical routines to really be figured out? And then there were others who supported the idea, staff or families that might work or have children in divisions around us that have this model that find value in it. So given the totality of the concerns, the questions, and what we heard, our recommendation at this point is that we continue exploring this possibility, but not quite take action yet. We may want to consider some different models for staggered start, 1 day or 2, grade bands, what that really looks like in practicality, and continue educating staff and families about the potential benefits, while also listening really carefully to those concerns that they have about the model and understanding whether or not there might be ways to mitigate those concerns or whether they are substantive enough that we might not want to go down this road. I do want to mention a couple of other revisions since the draft you saw on March 9th. There were a number of changes that were made. So this includes moving 2 of the half days to Wednesdays. They had all been on Fridays, but as we pulled the data and looked at attendance on half days, it's better when it's in the middle of the week than at the end of the week. And so we wanted to keep those half days to provide that valuable clerical time at the end of each quarter to our staff, while also trying to mitigate that impact on student attendance at the same time. I will also note that in the 24-25 calendar, the Jewish community requested an observance of Rosh Hashanah instead of Yom Kippur. And in recent years, you may recall that we've had the day off to allow them to observe Yom Kippur. But in the 24-25 calendar in particular, Yom Kippur begins on a Friday night, making an instructional day off there moot. Meanwhile, Rosh Hashanah starts on a Wednesday night, and so their request was that in that calendar year, we adjust to provide for a day off for the observance of Rosh Hashanah. And then the last thing I'll mention is that per our discussion, we talked a little bit about spring break back in March, and we have shifted spring break here based on the conversations with our regional counterparts. We try really hard to align to the greatest extent possible. And so the kind of general agreement is the first full week of April, and interpretations on that had varied. And so now we are all lined up and in alignment on the spring break. In addition to that, that actually moves spring break farther from Easter. Spring break then includes Diwali, and so Easter Monday has been added as a day off, but the total number of days for spring break, Diwali, and Easter Monday didn't change. So we weren't adding another day off that we had to make up somewhere else. We just kind of shifted around based on how those holidays fell. And that's the conclusion of my formal presentation, but happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Coy. Board members, do you have questions or comments? I'll start with Reverend Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to thank our advisory groups, calendar committee, and all who are involved in helping draft our school calendar. I appreciate the due diligence and all the hard work that goes into creating a calendar that's inclusive, aligns with our regional partners, builds in opportunities to address wellness, and takes some consideration of the needs of our students, staff, and families. So I want to say thank you. I know my son will be excited about the addition of Easter Monday because he mentioned that to me on Easter Sunday. So really excited about that. So I really don't have many questions, but I have one. One related to our community survey. I'm looking at slide 3. And the participation rates from the community survey, and it really speaks to the need for reevaluating how we are capturing student voice in our surveys. I know our students have much to say about our school calendars, because I hear from them and see their comments at times on social media, especially when it comes to wellness days and holidays. So my question is, could you share what approaches or even what creative ways, such as incentives or contests, that we're exploring or plan to explore to improve student participation in our community surveys?
I appreciate that, Reverend Cooper. I think we have learned a lot from some of our other surveys that we conduct division-wide about how to incentivize some of our students to participate. So with that HCPS survey, there are certainly competitions and incentives for schools to get those participation rates up, and we could learn from those practices to really boost that student voice in this particular survey.
Cisco, thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Cooper. Mrs. Shea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's lots of things I really like about this calendar. I want to thank you and your team for the adjustment to spring break. I think you and I have talked. That is by far the biggest piece of feedback I got from community as we've moved the whole calendar 2 weeks to kind of adapt and move spring break some to align with that. And I'm glad it aligns with our regional partners because I know that's important, but I think that move is the right thing to do. Another thing I really, really love about this calendar is how days are clustered together. For example, in November, the 4th through the 5th are off. In February is a 4-day weekend. I've heard really positive feedback from both staff and families about when we have these 4-day weekends or these clustered days off, how it really feels like a mini break and it's a breather. And it is really used to like relax and rejuvenate and come back refreshed and ready to learn, ready to teach, ready to serve our students. And that those this year have made a really big difference. And so I love seeing very strategic placement of the wellness days to create those clusters. When we talk about the half days, let's just talk about the half days. And I appreciate the look at the impact on attendance, as that is a major hurdle right now with state accreditation. The state accreditation piece is beyond our control, right? But we're looking at that very critically for all of our schools. And I understand and appreciate that approach. A half day on a Wednesday is, I find, really disruptive to learning for our students, especially if we look in elementary school. It just almost seems like 2 Mondays in the same week. You know, students staying engaged, as well as when we look at our families for childcare in the middle of the week, that can be challenging. So many things I really love about this calendar. The fact that we end school in May, like, wow, that's definitely something new for us. I think my area of concern, and I would be, I'd love to hear from other board members about how they feel. My only area of concern is those 2 half days on October 23rd and January 15th. I did look a little bit into, because I want them to be the most useful for our teachers as well, as it's the end of the marking period. But typically for the first store of grades, they typically have 4 to 6 days between the end of the 9 weeks and when they have to store grades. So even if the half day was 2 days after that end of 9 weeks, it would still be helpful in terms of processing all of those grades. Okay.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Shea. I'm going to go through what everyone has to say, and then we'll loop back to the half day.
Thank you.
Or if board members, Ms. Ogburn, Ms. Atkins,
Sure.
I'll loop back to you, Reverend Cooper, about the half day, your comment. Ms. Ogburn.
Well, I'll jump in on half days. I'm not a fan of half days either. When I was teaching, I didn't like them. I felt it was disruptive to the flow of teaching. However, if they're paired with, you know, the teacher's already in the building and you can have professional development in the afternoon or clerical, that's always helpful. But I understand the attendance on, if it's on a Friday. So that is one of those, it's bad both ways. I also honestly worry about, we're transporting students, we've spent the money to transport them, and then we just don't get a full day out of it. I personally would rather combine those 2 half-days and give them 1 full day off somewhere, but I'll throw back to the committee for discussion, but we're supposed to vote on it, so probably won't be any of that. But I did have just a quick question on the staggered start, because I know this is the first time we've ever talked about this. What are you hearing from other communities that have tried this? Is it a successful? I can really see the benefit of having our kindergartners, maybe even our first graders, but our 6th graders and 9th graders entering a building that is not teeming with people and getting a chance to, in a quieter, more relaxed setting, find your way around, just acclimate to the building, and having even other staff members who are not in that grade level support. I can see a real benefit to that, because those are obviously our biggest change and adjustment years. So what are you hearing from other districts? I'm curious.
I'll say anecdotally what I've heard from both parents, some of whom are HCPS staff who have children in those divisions, and the staff in those divisions, is once established, there seems to be overwhelming support for them. The transition, as with any transition, can be a little bit harder as we figure out new routines, what that looks like for other staff in a particular building who may have 3rd graders but are supporting the kindergarten and pre-K team, that type of thing. So that's anecdotally what we've heard through these conversations.
I mean, I look at what's best for our students. And yes, while it might be an inconvenience for families for lots of, any number of reasons, I understand it. I would like for us to pursue this as something we look into deeper once the message gets out to the community and we sort of get more feedback from the community, but also how does this work? I think that allowing our students to adjust, it's a great mental health aspect to that too, because I mean, walking into a middle school as a 6th grader, it's hard enough. But if you can do that in a more controlled, quiet, and ease them into it, I personally really like the idea. I just hope we'll learn more.
Yeah.
So I encourage that. But that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ogburn. Ms. Atkins.
Thank you for the presentation and for the team of folks that are working on it and will continue working on it. I only have two comments and a question. I'll respond to Mrs. Shea's request for remarks on half-days. Half-days can be disruptive, but I support moving the half-day off of Friday. When you look at attendance, whether you're looking at truancy or you're looking at chronic absenteeism, and you look at the dates on Fridays and look at the data, that supports moving those half-days off of Fridays, and absolutely not on Mondays. So I do support Wednesdays, and it'll be curious to see what the results are. So once we get the results in to better learn, we'll know if that's something that should continue, but I believe we should try and find out. The other part is around the results, participation rate. I'm interested in knowing what is the average response rate for staff, for students, and community. That's going to help me better understand the quality of the data. If our participation rates, if this is average and this is normal, that's a very small subset that is governing our decision-making for a very large community. So if you could share with me what the average participation rate is, if this is our normal participation rate and that's what we're going to use to drive our decision-making, I understand. But if it fluctuates, I would want to know that as well.
Sure, I can get that for you.
Thank you. And actually, I think that was 2, so I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Atkins. Roscoe, if you don't mind, Reverend Cooper, if you don't mind, I'm going to give some comment and then
Please feel free.
roll back to you, so you can address Mrs. Shea's question about half-days. I support, of course, I think the team that worked on this calendar effort. It's so many different pieces and parts moving, so the collaboration there is certainly appreciated from all stakeholders. I'm with Ms. Atkins on wanting to see the data that supports feedback regarding the calendar, because I don't think it's representative of our community that we serve. We serve a large division. So the response rate to me is not high enough, and I want to know what more we can do there. I support the half-day, though disruptive, at a time where we're trying to support our teachers and staff. This day is vital to them. Dr. Cashwell, do you have any comments about Friday versus Wednesday? I do believe, as to what Ms. Atkins just said, Fridays are not as productive and well-attended as Wednesdays.
Certainly, and just want to acknowledge the concerns related to half-days in general and the general complications of coming up with the calendar. So remember, our calendar committee is comprised of teachers. So teacher voice is a big part of development of this calendar, of course, community, faith-based leaders, administrators, so on. So, they work really hard to make sure that they're creating a calendar that balances student needs, family needs, staff member needs. And so even understanding some of the challenges of half-days, the need to balance clerical time is critically important and not create, more days off for students that elongate the school year. So they're still recommending the use of 2 half-days. There's no perfect placement, but certainly when you look at attendance data, both for staff and students on Fridays and some half-days, I think both present challenges. And, one of the things that, understanding the importance of having those early release days so that staff can take care of PL or clerical needs and having that critical time, but again, not creating a full student holiday that then adds student days to the calendar elsewhere. I think Wednesday's definitely a good compromise, and to everyone's point, we can certainly look at that data. And you're only approving calendars so many years in advance, and that really gives opportunities to learn from each calendar. I would note with the survey, those are designed to get a pulse check on a committee-developed calendar, not necessarily to weigh in against an option A or option B. So I think the survey data is important. We appreciate people weighing in on various aspects of the calendar. For example, in this survey, we asked about questions about a staggered start. So certainly, want to balance all the layers of input that went into this calendar with that not being a standalone, but certainly participation is always important to us. We want to garner more of that. We learned from the survey questions specifically about, again, we asked about placement of wellness days, about, we weren't looking at, for example, in the past, we've surveyed about a pre and post Labor Day start, where they were really weighing 2 options. In this case, it was to get perceptions around particular things that were recommendations by the committee that put the calendar forward, but really tells us and gave us some great insight around, more exploration related to the staggered start. That's the first time we asked about it. We know we'll need to ask more times to broaden the audience, make sure we're hearing from more people on something that would be such a significant change.
Thank you for that, Dr. Cashwell. I definitely support the exploration of the staggered start, just knowing how difficult those transitions are anyway. And no matter what level you're in, elementary, middle, or high school, and the relationship focus and the connections that we've been trying to build in our school communities. So I definitely support exploring that. I'm fine with the Wednesday half-day because I actually looked at other localities, and other localities around us perhaps are using Thursday as an example. So not everyone around us is using Friday as a half-day. I do want to ask you, Dr. Cashwell, and your team to please be aware of the ending of our school year, falling with Memorial Day Monday, falling on the 26th for 24-25. And of course, this year we have a half-day, or wellness day, for 2024, we have a half day on the last day, and for 2025, on the last day falls on Memorial Day week. right? So how are we, with Monday off and Friday being the last day, attendance is still important, right, as to seat time. So I would just ask that I'm certain the team probably is already thinking about how to encourage everyone to come and communicate that attendance is still important, even on the last week of school. And then I just want to thank you again for really going back and looking at spring break. I know the board received feedback, not only in our inbox, but around and about as well. And thank you for changing the Jewish holiday since it fell on the weekend, as does Easter. So thank you for giving Easter, the consideration and adding Easter Monday. That is all I have. Reverend Cooper.
I'm fine with the half-day.
Thank you so much. I believe we have our answers. Thank you so much, Ms. Coy.
Ms. Kinsella, can I redirect? I promise it's not about the half-day.
Absolutely, Mrs. Shea.
I'm taking the L there. As we talk about the staggered start and the benefit of the staggered start, perhaps we could reap some of the same benefits, just an idea to toss around on the feasibility, providing transportation for a half-day orientation the week before school starts. So I don't know if that's feasible. Perhaps it could be tied into dry runs for transportation, but overcome some of those pieces.
We actually have done that at some schools. And again, one of the barriers to doing a summer program is not everyone can participate. So I think we can certainly look at, we want to make sure we're working with our schools in any of their summer orientations, if they need transportation or other things added in, that we can do that. But again, anytime it's outside of the school calendar during the summertime when students aren't planning on returning, your attendance is limited. So, but definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Shea. And if I might just add to the staggered start conversation, one more thing, that can we just transition to the starting, our rollback and getting out earlier first before we implement staggered start?
Ed, we didn't propose an implementation. We simply asked about it because there's
Right.
been a great bit of interest. In fact, I'll tell you, a lot of the interest from our community came not only when some neighboring localities did that and talk about regional calendars. A number of our staff members have children in localities doing that, neighboring localities. When we first we're coming back to in-person learning after virtual learning, we used a staggered.
Right.
And we got a lot of feedback from our staff and students and families about some of the positive aspects of doing that. So we want to do our due diligence to explore that before we bring a recommendation to the board. So our recommendation is that we continue to explore and share information with you. We certainly aren't looking to make that's not our recommendation, but thought it would be helpful in context of calendars to share that data and start that discussion here.
Great, thank you so much. And board members, just as a reminder, we'll be approving the calendar for school year 24-25 at this evening's monthly meeting. Dr. Cashwell.